In the past few years, there have been literally hundreds of stories about fentanyl overdoses. And one growing trend in this, a genre of fentanyl overdose story, is first responders and especially police officers apparently suffering horrible side effects of even incidental contact with fentanyl. There's a few issues scientifically with that. And these issues are consequential. People are being put in jail because of these supposed overdoses. Joining us now to break down this story is reporter Lindsey Ellefson. ODing after being exposed to fentanyl. Can you tell us a little bit about what you discovered?
Yeah, absolutely. This summer, there was a big case out of San Diego where there was this video of a deputy who fell on the ground and his coworkers came around him. They had naloxone, the opioid overdose reversal drug, and they gave it to him, and his department released this big PSA saying, this is something that could happen to any police officer in the field who encounters fentanyl during a traffic stop or something like that. And that was one of dozens, hundreds of stories like those. We hear them all the time. But the difference with that one was there was a huge pushback. There were hundreds of doctors and toxicologists who spoke out and said, we've been saying for years, this is not possible. You cannot touch fentanyl and experience any kind of overdose. And after that, there was a bunch of debunking in the media, which was a long time coming and really overdue because the media, in fact, had credulously repeated these sort of press releases from police departments for years and years. But I noticed a lot of this debunking and I thought it was great. It's good for the media to kind of come out and say, all right, we made a mistake reporting this. Here are the facts as doctors and toxicologists and experts are telling us the facts. And then I found out while I was kind of looking into this myself that there are more people involved than these original stories or even the debunkings let us know. Obviously, this impacts taxpayers, this impacts people who use drugs, this impacts the police officers who are going into the field with this extreme fear of fentanyl that, according to experts, is totally unfounded. But this also impacts people who have been charged with assault or endangerment of police officers as a result of this widespread belief that simply touching fentanyl or being around it poses them some kind of risk. And so I looked into two cases of people who have been charged this way, and both of the people that I looked into are currently in jail.
Yeah, and one in particular, Justin Buckle. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened with him?
For sure. I spoke to him and the police officer involved with that story at length for my article. And so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of what happened. Justin was a young man in Ohio who told me that he did use drugs, he did sell drugs. This was, a pretty big part of his daily life. The police officer that I spoke to as well confirmed, Justin was known to them in the area for this sort of behavior. And that's not uncommon in Ohio, which has been particularly impacted with the opioid crisis, as it's known, especially because that part of Appalachia was really targeted by Purdue and its marketers back in the day. And so Ohio was really kind of an epicenter for this sort of thing. And Justin was just one of many people like that there in Ohio. The difference between Justin and so many of the other people who did drugs or sold drugs in Ohio was that he was pulled over one night. Any other night, it was pretty regular one as far as these kind of busts go. But the officer who responded, an off-duty officer named Chris Green, after he arrested Justin for tampering with evidence and a bunch of other charges related to possessing and selling the drugs that they found in the car that night, he said that he had some kind of reaction an hour later after he brushed a little bit of powder off of himself while he was back at the police station. And this generated a ton of headlines. He was on the national news. If you search Justin's name online, you get all of these stories from 2017 saying officer overdoses just from touching fentanyl. He, got a big CNN write-up. He was on CBS News. And as a result of this huge media storm, Justin's case is kind of like the foundational case for this sort of thing. He ended up being charged also with assault on Officer Chris Green. And even though he had 22 other charges that were all related to the trafficking and the tampering with evidence, possessing that, and even a windshield charge, a broken windshield charge. Even though he had all of these other charges, when he was ultimately sentenced to 6.5 years in prison in 2018, the Ohio Attorney General released this press release that led with man sent to jail for assaulting a police officer. So right away, when you look at that case, the thing that sticks out, the thing that they focused on was this alleged assault that he ultimately ended up going to prison for. And that made up a year and a half of his sentence.
And really fast, just to confirm, the assault is purely supposedly the exposure. He did not additionally attack the cop physically or anything like that.
No. Officer Green was treated for an overdose after brushing the powder off of himself. He told me that he didn't know if he underwent a toxicology screening, and that is the sort of like through line that you see in a lot of these cases. Many cops that I spoke to who've had these sort of stories said that they either didn't know if they had a toxicology screening or that they just did not have a toxicology screening. So yeah, this was entirely based on the fact that Officer Green was treated for an overdose that day, and then that became the story.
It seems interesting that they would be so worried about these overdoses that they would make big PSAs and news things out of it, but not actually demonstrate it with some sort of scientific test that could say that that stuff was actually in their system. You mentioned the San Diego case, which we had covered on the show, that these doctors are saying this is impossible. So if it is impossible, is there a working theory as to what is going on with all these cops? Is this a placebo sort of thing? Like when I was a busboy in a restaurant and I drank non-alcoholic beer and got drunk off of it? Or is the belief that a lot of cops are simply lying? I mean, I would never want to imply that a police officer would ever lie or anything, but what is going on since they clearly are not actually overdosing from incidental contact with fentanyl?
There are a couple different theories here. There was one study, which is mentioned in my piece, that showed 80% of police officers who were surveyed for the study, like just believed that touching fentanyl could cause them some kind of harm. So this, first of all, is something that is really entrenched. After my story came out, a lot of law enforcement people reached out to me and told me that they had been taught in trainings in their workplaces that this was a real threat to them and not to touch it. And that they, some of them were like, wow, I'm so glad to read that's not true. And some of them were a little bit more angry with me and told me like, no, it is true. I heard it at work, So this is something that kind of is very difficult to debunk because it's so entrenched in their line of work. And as one of the doctors that I interviewed for this story pointed out, there isn't a lot of interface between the medical and toxicology communities and the law enforcement community. And you can do as much outreach as you want, but this is something that has really taken hold in police departments as a very serious belief. All of the police officers and law enforcement officials that I spoke to for this story were adamant that this is a very real threat to them and it is a big danger to them. And I sent all of them, the letters from toxicologists, I sent them studies and I was like, all right, well, read these and tell me what you think. And every single one of them responded that no, they still know that this is an overdose threat to them. So there is this like pervasive belief among law enforcement officials that this is a huge danger, which obviously results in a lot of anxiety. A lot of experts that I spoke to for the story suggested that this could be, panic attacks. And when you look at it, this sort of gasping, falling to the ground, becoming agitated, that sounds more like the symptoms of a panic attack than the symptoms of an opioid overdose. The symptoms of an opioid overdose are actually, as terrible as this is, a lot kind of calmer. And you even read sometimes about police officers who give themselves naloxone. That's not how naloxone works. Someone else has to administer it. It's designed so that someone else can administer it because an opioid overdose presents in a way where the person is unresponsive, like their breathing is decreasing and they're slowly slipping away. That's how naloxone works. So if you're in a position to give it to yourself, like that's not what's going on with you. And then aside from the idea that this could be some kind of panic attack, there is also what's known as the Nocebo Effect, which is kind of what you mentioned, where they're going into this situation, seeing it, having this line of sight reaction and believing so fiercely that this could happen that then they begin experiencing some kind of symptom.
Yeah, 100%. And you've been very responsible with your reporting. I will speculate about the possibility that the individual cops might well believe it and freak out, have panic attacks. If I had powder blown in my face and I was told that it was some sort of poison, I might react really negatively. It's also entirely possible that they believe it quite genuinely because of what they've been told. Senior cops might be using it because it's very convenient to make cops once again out to be a victim, to make it easier to get convictions for now what will be considered a violent crime that is not in fact violent. So all of these are interesting potential avenues for further reporting, but I appreciate you getting the views of the cops, the doctors, and those that have now been negatively affected. The final question for you though, because you talked about the negative reaction to the San Diego case. you as you've said, there have been like 150 stories like this or more.
Yeah.
Do you think that we've turned a corner now? Are the media going to be a little bit more critical about these sorts of stories?
No, not at all. There've been more stories, not necessarily involving first responders, but since my piece came out, a week and a half ago, there have been more of these stories in the news. And this doesn't just impact police departments. There was an emergency room in Massachusetts that actually was completely shut down for a time because of a supposed fentanyl exposure. So these are medical professionals who are believing that they have been endangered by someone who is experiencing an overdose in their emergency room. There was that school in Connecticut where unfortunately a teen died, I believe last week. That school was also placed on lockdown because of the child in question experiencing his overdose symptoms there at the school. So when I read the reports on that, and I do because I have a Google alert for fentanyl, I read all of these stories and all of those simply said, these places were put on lockdown because of the fentanyl exposure. And I didn't really see any pushback. I didn't see them interviewing anyone who said, well, that's not necessary. We're rerouting patients out of this hospital in Massachusetts to their own detriment potentially, which is horrifying to me. And we don't have any of that represented in the reporting about why that was not necessary, according to experts and toxicologists. So no, I do not think that we are turning a corner, but I think it's still worth it to keep trying and keep working on responsible reporting, because that's the only way that things are going to change for everyone who is impacted by this.
I think that you're likely right. And thank you for being on this beat. We really do appreciate it. Lindsey Ellefson, as always, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.